Hello, I'm Henriette from MDC. Welcome to this Wednesday TITBIT with Rasmus Elsborg from Reflow Maritime. Well, today we are 32 persons registered for this TITBIT, and I got a little bit curious to see where you guys came along from. So I will share from how we are reaching out with this TITBIT. There are people from Athens, from Finland, from Mumbai, from Spain, from US, from UK, from Ecuador. Welcome all the way from Ecuador. And then, of course, we have a lot of Danes all the way from Renault, Korsør, Odense, Horsens, and so on. And, of course, Copenhagen. So welcome to all of you to this 6th week of TITBITs. You all know the concept, 15 minutes presentation with Rasmus, and then it's followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. So in case you have any questions, you just put them down here and ask a question. Last time we had the first TITBIT with Rasmus about circular economy. There were quite a lot of questions. So, and you can even put a vote on which question you want us to ask afterwards. But let's not talk too much. Let's have a toast for a great TITBIT.
Excellent.
And then let's get started. Rasmus, will you say just a few words about yourself and have a nice
of course.
TITBIT to all of you.
Thank you so much, Henriette. My name is Rasmus. I'm the founder of Reflow Maritime. We are a startup focusing on circular economy in the maritime industry. We have previously just gone through circular economy in a previous TITBIT, so it's interesting. What we're going to look at today is we're going to dive into circular economy in more details and look a little bit deep dive into business models. I have found some different cases we're going to look at. Today, Reflow Maritime, we are looking at, we are focusing on consultancy, and we also developed a digital platform to facilitate the use of circular economy within the maintenance of the world's merchant fleet. Enough about me. Let's talk about the presentation and let's dive into circular economy. If you have any questions, please put them in the Ask a Question bar in the bottom of the screen, and then we'll take them at the end of the presentation. So as Henriette mentioned, we're now going to dive into circular economy. We are going beyond the standard stuff now. So we all have a basic understanding of circular economy as something where you reuse components in some kind of a loop. But now we're going to dive into, so how does it actually work in real life, and how can we as a company implement these different practices and business models and approaches. So welcome, and let's get going. So the first slide we're going to look into, we also had that on the previous presentation, is this wonderful slide. The reason why I like this one is because it ties everything in. It ties the activities, it ties the business models, and it ties the activities and the value chain. So, but let's start to dive in. If we look at the product design area here first, where the value chain basically start when we design our product, here there are different aspects we need to catch to implement in order to be good at circular economy and look forward. Before I just talk about that, I just want to say that circular economy, I think it's very important that everybody understands the circular economy is not just one approach. It's not just doing one thing, one activity, or just have a certain business model. It's a complex, multifaceted approach or multifaceted way of running a company and a practice. So it's something about reuse of materials. But let's dive into the design phase, the product design here. So here it says here it's really important to have something built to last. It's going to be a benefit later on when we talk about how we're going to reuse your products and how we're going to reuse materials. So it's important that we look at design a doable product. So when we dive into the value chain product design a doable product, make it modular, right? So design it modular so it can easily be replaced and then components can be replaced. Make it smart and make it easy to service. That's some of the main pointers here. Also, when you talk circular economy, make sure you design product where you make them future-proof, make them smart, incorporate IoT, different smart technologies into your product, so you can get some data on the condition of the product, how is it running, can we make it more efficient, etc., etc. Now we move over from the design phase over to the sourcing and manufacturing stage here. When we talk about the sourcing, it's really good for the environment, but also for the cost perspective. If you incorporate in the pre-production stage, when we talk about sourcing of the raw materials, old components. That could be you have scrapped old components that you have received back from the users. You can incorporate that into your products. By doing so, you can lower the cost, but also the carbon footprint. We're going to look at some examples where you can actually really lower your carbon footprint in a little bit. Talking about, on the sourcing stage, it's also important to know your carbon footprint of your components. So that's really important. I'm going to definitely emphasize having life cycle assessments done on your components, so you know, as a producer, where do we actually start when we talk about circular economy. Now, moving on from the manufacturing stage, we're looking at the logistics stage. Now, the logistics is one of the, in our experience, is one of the major game changers in the maritime industry, because we have always focused on a linear approach where we're just sending components out to the end user. But now, looking at circular economy, we now have to focus on the return logistics. So return logistics basically means that we need to prepare to receive used components or used products back from the users. Doing so, we need to have these procedures in place. We also need to be able to focus on return documentation, labeling. We also need to focus on customs. How do we get stuff back from the ships around the world? Here you can use different digital systems. We have seen examples with IoT tracking. So in the crates, there are different equipment where you can always see where it is, but also the condition and when to expect it back and so on. It's also important that when you talk about logistics in a circular perspective, it's important to keep your carbon footprint down, right? So when you offer logistics options to your customer, you need to offer them in the way is least polluting. So typically we would say sea, rail, truck, and plane in that order, because plane is one of the most polluting. It leads out the most carbon emissions. So it's important that you also optimize that part of the supply chain. So now we're going over to marketing and sales, and here we can see when you start working with circular economy, we talked about having the carbon footprint calculated on your products. Now you can actually dive into the marketing and sales opportunities using your carbon footprint. You're now aware of the environmental footprint that your product leads out, and knowing that, you also have the option to improve it. So this is really where we can see short-term advantages for industries here. If they start looking at their carbon footprint, they start looking at different activities. If you look in the bottom, there are some blue activities. We all know them in the maritime industry. We have the repair and maintain, we got the upgrade, we got the resell. But there's also a very important one that I brought up last time. It's called remanufacturing. Now, remanufacturing is all about remanufacturing. So you take your used product back, and then you go through the manufacturing step one more time. You're going to end up with a product that has the same quality, that has the same durability, and also have the same or even better quality than the new product. So it's a really important step that when you talk about remanufacturing, this is where it can really benefit. And this is also where the product design ties in. So remanufacturing is basically disassembling a product and reassembling using either reclaimed or new materials or components in a way that it can actually fulfill the new product's work even better. Or even better, I think we're going to say here. Okay, so doing it in marketing and sales, this carbon footprint thing, working with remanufacturing, you now have the option to actually show these improvements, remanufacturing has the ability to cut carbon emissions by up to 95% versus a new component in some cases we've seen. So this is really exciting stuff. And this is where you as a manufacturer can differentiate yourself from low-cost, cheap alternatives that we see right now many ship owners are buying right now. So if you go after and offer remanufactured components, you're going to have able to offer your product typically with a lower price and perhaps even 90% carbon footprint savings. It is important, however, that you keep the same quality, et cetera, et cetera. So this is an important step. Now we're going to talk into the use stage over here, where we talk about the business models. Now, one of the major game changers talking circular economy is looking at new business models, because if you have the right product design, you have tailored the right activities, and you have your logistics in order, then you're now able to offer new business models. And here we're talking product or performance as a service. We know the as a service elements from the maritime or from the IT industry. So here you don't necessarily need to own something. But there are some few things you need to know when you offer as a service. So instead of the customer owning the product, you might just offer them. So the performance that your product is basically doing, you're offering that to them instead. So in order to do that, it's important that you do these our return on investment calculations and figure out mapping the touch points, where we are creating revenue as an industry. We also need to figure out if you need to do a product redesign. You need to take that into account. So price as service, we're going to dive into that in the following slide. But before then, let me just highlight this one. This is what we're using here, Reflow, when we do some of our consultancy work. This is what we call the green double donut. And this is basically highlighting the key areas that we see in the maritime industry where you can do the biggest difference, both bottom line, but also on the environmental side. So looking at some new approaches like incorporating new modular designs in your designs, smart devices, talking about remanufacturing. If you can master as a producer the remanufacturing, you are a huge step ahead of your competition. There are many manufacturers right now that are looking into it, but it's really infancy compared to automotive and aviation as we see today. But also the use stage here, looking at access, performance, access over here. So instead of the customer now needs to own your product, but giving them access to it is very very good or very interesting. Looking at the performance, so you know as the producer when your product is performing the best, and you also have many times a good idea about how to tweak it and how to optimize it. And this is where all that know-how can go in play if you start offering your product based on a performance view. I brought this case from Renault. So now we're looking at an automotive equivalent here. So now we're looking, how is Renault actually working? This is an automotive case where Renault is working on remanufacturing. So here Renault is incorporating remanufactured components into their supply chain. So when you as a car owner get your car serviced and they say they're going to change something, it might just be it's a remanufactured component. You will never know, but you'll get the same experience as a new component. But let's look at it. So they have about 325 employees in this factory. Huge turnover. They can actually offer these components with 30 to 50% cost savings. But that's the cost, right? But then we look at the environmental bottom line. These figures are amazing, right? 80% less energy, 92% less chemical products, and so on. And that's because they're reusing as much as possible of these components, right? So this is a case of where they're actually using remanufacturing in another industry. Let's move on and let's look at a little bit at product as a service and how is that working before we go into details with that. So product as a service. Now, if you combine it with the remanufacturing activity as we saw earlier, incorporating product as a service in the maritime industry can be a game changer. Now, suddenly the ship owners don't have to invest in these assets anymore. They can now lease it or even have as a part of a use agreement with the suppliers. Using remanufactured components as a supplier, you're able to cut cost be more competitive, but also you can start looking at even more touch points that you could before. That means you create value over time. So if we go to the next slide here, you can see the top one is how we do it today as a producer. You design it, you build it, you sell it. You're gonna maybe have a warranty service period, and then you're gonna have uncertainty, because are you gonna end up with the service in the future in the spare parts? Sometimes, and sometimes it's going to be done by local shipyards or actors around the world. Now, looking at a product as a service, if you incorporate all these steps we talked about with the smart design, the doable product, we have these return logistics element, we also have these remanufacturing activities. If you tie that all in, you're now able to create monetization on multiple points instead of just to sell, right? So now you have option to actually deploy your product, take a revenue for that. You can offer to monitor the product, optimizing the product. You can also maintain the product, of course, and then you can offer upgrades, either part of a subscription service free of charge or as part of a buy-up plan. Now, I put in arrows in the bottom here, and this one is basically to show you that there are return scenarios where you can return these these used units back to get remanufactured. So as a producer, you don't need to supply new all the time. We're going to speed up here. Now we're just going to have this quick example here with the headphones. This is a headphone manufacturer called Aura that has basically designed circular headphones from scratch. They have developed this awesome new way of making them modular. So now you don't need to own your headphones, you just rent them, and then you get free upgrades and you can return them when you're done using them, or you can even customize them. So this is an awesome product. We are shifting over to the climate now. And here we are looking at direct and indirect emissions. I wrote in my teaser a little bit about we're only seeing half the picture in the maritime industry. Many shipping lines are looking at cutting carbon, making them carbon neutral. This is only half the fact, because they're only looking at what's called scope 1 emissions. That means direct emissions. That means the emissions that is created when they burn fuel on their vessels. Now, we have seen many examples of other activities, right? So we have the indirect emissions. Indirect emissions is from the production of the components that are installed on the vessels, is the maintenance of the vessels, and the logistics supply chain supporting the maintenance of the vessels. From what we can see, this is a very, very important factor to calculate in. I can use a car example over here again. This is an electric car. When we look at the use scenario as we did before with the vessel burning fuel, let's say that the maritime industry now are able to just burn biofuel. So that would be the equivalent of the electric car. Now we have a carbon neutral industry, right? Wrong, because this is only you looking at the use stage. Let's look at the manufacturing stage. That's what we call the indirect emissions. This is an eye-opener also for me when I saw it the first time. So manufacturing electric car, even though in the use stage it's carbon neutral, you have a much higher carbon footprint than its equivalent conventional car. So this was the teaser for me today in regards to circular economy, with some specific examples and highlighting something food for thought in when you need to implement business models. So thank you very much for listening. I'm short on time, but please feel free to connect with me also on LinkedIn, and we can go and have a much better dialogue, or we can shoot me an email, and we can take a chat from there. I'm open for questions now. Do we have any?
Yes, we do, Rasmus. Thank you so much for introducing
Welcome.
even deeper into the topic. And I really did appreciate your examples, because that makes it much more understandable. I have heard that about the electric car before, but very, very good visual way you showed us. Good. So one of the questions which has come in is from Eske Kjeldal, and he asks, will this not require a company to take care of both design and production to have the full benefit? Very good question.
Yes, I would say the ideal would be to have all the steps in you have control all over the steps as a producer. But if you're a designer, let's say you're designing engines or equipment, you can still design the equipment or the engines in a way that they have supporting the steps further on, because it could be you're not manufacturing, but you might be servicing down the line. So if you make some serviceable designs or make them smart, you can tie in some circular practices in that way. But the ideal scenario would be that you have control all over the steps, definitely. Yeah.
Yes, because it's also about the logistics afterwards. It's not just the production of the unit or the product or the design. It's very much indeed also the logistics. How do you transport it and all that stuff? Can you say a little bit more about that?
The logistics is really important. We see several ship owners that are not looking at remanufactured components because they have very small, they almost have no procedures in place to handle the return side of it. And many producers, if you're not, or service companies, if you're not returning it on time, the used unit, then you get a penalty. That could be the price of a new or some kind of a penalty. And then suddenly the idea is gone. So that's really important.
So is this something, I mean, we have in CBS, we have a supply chain management direction of the CBS studies. Is this circular economy something which is introduced to these young fellows?
Yeah, I think the maritime side of circular economy is very little. We have done some research into the area, looking at previous studies, and there are no more than 5 to 6 papers out there at the moment looking at the circular economy in the maritime. So I think many business school students are looking at, as I've done today, cases from other industries in order to create these eye-openers and these examples. But there are still some companies today looking at circular economy and also doing it today in smaller scale.
So guys, if you have any interns in your companies out there, that could be one good thesis to make some kind of case study for your companies, and perhaps you can ask Rasmus for an advice how to handle it.
Yeah.
We have a few questions here. I'll get into the question and answers here. We have Andy. He's asking, measuring carbon footprint. Do you have any advice, please? Who can we turn to for help? Very concrete question, Andy.
Definitely. I think we need to be a little specific here. Is it the carbon footprint in regards to direct emissions or indirect emissions? If it's indirect emissions, which I have an idea that's what you're asking into here, what we need to do in order to get the carbon footprint is to have what's called a life cycle assessment. So using advanced modeling and different databases where you have different impacts on different materials, you're able to assess a product's carbon footprint, but also environmental impact. And that's a really important tool in order to know the carbon footprint of a product. That's something we have just launched here at Reflow that we are offering. So if you need that, let's talk further after the TITBIT. I'll be happy to point you either to us or in a different to somebody else that can help out with that.
Andy, I don't know if you have been listening along before, but after the TITBIT, we will send out the contact information of Rasmus and also how to connect with him at LinkedIn. So it will be very easy for you both to review this broadcast and also to connect up with Rasmus. So I have another question here, which is from Rajesh. Rajesh is one of our Indian listeners. And he would like to know, how could you elaborate a bit on handling plastic waste from ships?
Yeah. So when we talk about plastic waste, the main challenge with plastic waste is it's sorted into, or it's in what we call fractions. So it's not just pure type of plastic. So many times the waste from vessels used on the ships have many different qualities of plastic, many different types of plastic. And those types are not always compatible in a recycling scenario. So they cannot just all be melded together. So the trick here is to have them separated into separate fractions. You've all seen if you look in the bottom of a cola bottle, you will see if it's made out of plastic, we have a symbol, either a number or some letters, and that indicates to the type of plastic. So handling plastic waste, for many, it's just an end-of-life scenario. But on the vessels, there are local actors at port that can help you out with that, with the handling of the plastic waste. But the key is here to have the plastic waste separated into the fractions, so it's easier to get recycling if you have what's called clean types or clean fractions, because in that way you can say, okay, I got 3 tons of PE type 2, who want to buy that? And then if you got the clean fractions, you can actually monetize on that, or at least get rid of it for free. But it's all about sorting plastic. That's the key here.
So this is also what we're doing very much in the Danish cities, more or less now, that we have really to subdivide into all different kinds of plastic and metal and so on. A little bit complicated, but you get used to it.
That's true.
I have a question about the carbon footprint on ships. I mean, ships, they have so many components. They do so much emissions. They have, is it something you have started up doing some calculations on? Because I mean, that's really a huge part to start. Where should you start? Where should you end? I mean, there are so many things.
It's really complex. A ship is comprised of many different systems. Propulsion systems, auxiliary systems, hull, electrical systems, so on. Calculating carbon footprint for an entire vessel is a very complex job, and it needs to be separated into small areas. Actually, that's something we've been working on for the last half year, funded by the Danish Maritime Fund, working together with stakeholders around the world. So in this job, we have actually, as far as we see, one of the spearheads in the industry now, first people that have worked on this, mapped the different carbon footprint scenarios on vessels, but also saying what kind of a remanufacturing potential of cutting, or how much carbon footprint can we cut when we start looking at remanufacturing. And the results are being published here by the end of this month. And I've sneak peeked and looked at some of the results, and those are mind-blowing. So looking at indirect emissions of producing and maintaining a vessel, incorporating some of these elements that we have already looked at in my presentation here, can actually lower the carbon footprint of a vessel dramatically. That's as far as I can get here without stealing the thunder for our project, but it's really interesting work. And that's also why we already now are recommending all producers to get their carbon footprint. It doesn't need to be complicated. It can be done down to 3 to 4 weeks, all depending on what kind of data they have ready. And then they will get a carbon footprint, and from there they can start making it better. And actually knowing the carbon footprint, I think there are many ship owners that would actually say, okay, you have done an important step, and we can use this for our green bottom line also in our calculations there. So I think it's really important. Yeah.
When will the report be ready?
The report will be ready the end of this month. Yeah. So around that, I will send out an invite to you, Henriette, and you can share. You're welcome to share that once it's ready. We will actually do a webcast. So if we all stay in contact, you'll be happy. We can show you some of the key findings in regards to different components on the vessels and how much you can actually save, and also what is the footprint before and after remanufacturing. That's really interesting.
I will send it out to all who participated here. I can send both the link to the report and also the webcast that you're going to do. I'm sure that people will be interested in that. I have another 2 questions. I hope they're not too long because we're going to end very soon. But Patrick is asking, can you elaborate a bit on the different scopes and the direct/indirect emissions mentioned before, and the relation to the maritime industry?
Yeah, I think we had the previous slide here where we looked at the different types of emissions. Again, the direct emissions is what everybody is talking about in the common language here in the industry, saying, let's cut the cost and let's cut emissions and let's make it carbon neutral. Here, for almost every time, they're saying direct emissions. And that's where biofuel and something comes in. But it has no relation to actually the maintenance of the ship and the environmental footprint and the carbon emissions that is derived from maintaining, producing the supply chain, using energy when producing the engine, etc., etc. There is definitely room for improvement there, but it's also a business potential for the producers that can master the optimization of the carbon footprint for sure. They can differentiate themselves there.
Thank you, Rasmus. We have a last one from Ida Lund, and she asked, you mentioned the business model product as a service, and with the headphone case, do you have some maritime examples where this could work? Very, very good and relevant question. Thank you, Ida.
Yeah, I've seen, we have studied into some examples from a Danish service company, a maritime service company that have gone in cooperation with a German producer of turbochargers called KBB. And these two companies have gone together, joined themselves, and are offering a remanufactured exchange basis on their components. So they have a modular product design saying we can actually sell a new or better solution with lower cost, lower carbon footprint back. So this is a case of where somebody is starting to looking at it, but I don't have maritime examples at the moment where we're saying here we have a full turnkey solutions with product as a service. We're seeing some pilot projects, but I think the closest we can get to it right now is the aviation industry, with aircraft engines are being delivered as a service. That means that the performance and at the time you use the engine is what you pay for as the airline, and not necessarily the engine. So you don't have these large capital expenditures to begin with. That's the closest, but I'll keep looking for more cases on that. And if you know anything, any cases like that, feel free to share them with me, and we can all get close on that one.
Good. Let's take the very last question from Gregory. He's asking, is there any attempt to establish standards that facilitate the adoption of circular economy principles?
That's a really, really good question. I am there are on the ISO level right now. I'm part of the work group within the technical committee with Danish Standard, which is the Danish standardization agency working with ISO. And here we are working together with 18 other countries in the world right now, establishing the first ISO standard for circular economy. That means the management practices standard for circular economy. But I definitely call for more action towards a maritime standard, because what we are looking at right now is a broad circular economy standard that is really a big compromise of where should we look. So I'm definitely looking for support to say let's all go forward and look at a maritime standard. That could really be interesting. But there are work being done right now. And if you want to hear more about that, again, feel free to contact me. I'll share what I can do on that. But it's about 3 years away from being official standard.
Wow. We are proud to have you from a maritime Danish company in this committee. So you're gonna set the standards for the ISO in the future. Great, Rasmus. It's always a pleasure having you in the TITBIT studio.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing all your insight in circular economy. I hope that everybody got a little bit more knowledge about it. And again, reach out to Rasmus if you have further questions. Back here, it's just to say thank you to all of you for listening along. Tomorrow we'll have Christian Nislev speaking about a very serious thing, which is if you have some stakeholders or customers who are not able to pay their bills, or they're going in reconstruction or decline. So how are you going to prepare yourself and your company for these situations? So that will be the TITBIT of tomorrow. It's something that we don't hope will happen, but better be prepared if it should be happening. And then next week we will have TITBITs about scrubbers. So this could be, perhaps you should listen along, Rasmus, and see if you could make a circular economy business case on the scrubbers, because that's indeed one of the direct emissions which is taken care of there. And then we will also have live Carson, who will talk about how to use your hashtags, like a little bit how to get better on using your LinkedIn profile, and especially now where we are so much online in our communication with the customers, stakeholders, colleagues, and so on. So it's about LinkedIn and hashtags next week and scrubbers. So again, hope you enjoyed this tidbit. Have a wonderful day. The sun is shining, at least here in Denmark. And bye to everyone. Thank you for listening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.